At 4:47 a.m. on November 3, 1943, Private First Class Raymond Dutch Vandermeer crouched in a muddy foxhole on Bougainville Island, watching 9 Japanese scouts creep through the kunai grass 180 yards away. His Springfield M1903 lay beside him, useless. In his hands was something else entirely, a rifle the Army had explicitly banned 3 weeks earlier, a weapon his own captain had ordered destroyed. Within the next 48 hours, all 9 of those scouts would be dead, killed by a farm boy from Iowa who'd spent his childhood shooting groundhogs with a contraption his grandfather called a hay rack special. The military establishment would call it unauthorized. The Japanese would call it unfair. Vandermeer would call it the only way to stay alive. The story of how an illegal rifle modification changed American sniper doctrine in the Pacific Theater doesn't begin with glory. It begins with dirt. Raymond Vandermeer grew up outside Sioux City, Iowa, where his family worked 240 acres of corn and soybeans that barely turned a profit. His father died when Raymond was 12, heart attack in the North Field, found face down in the furrows by his older brother. After that, keeping the farm running fell to Raymond, his mother, and 2 younger sisters who couldn't tell a carburetor from a crankshaft. The farm had a groundhog problem, serious enough that Raymond's grandfather, a Dutchman who'd homesteaded the land in 1891, had devised his own solution decades earlier. He'd taken an old Winchester lever action, removed the standard stock, and built what he called a hay rack, a crude wooden platform that extended forward from the trigger assembly. The shooter would rest the rifle across a hay bale or fence post, belly down, using the extended platform for stability. Ungainly, ugly, effective. By age 14, Raymond could hit groundhogs at 220 yards using his grandfather's hay rack rig. By 16, he was taking down coyotes at 300. He wasn't a natural athlete, wasn't quick with his fists, wasn't popular at school. But he could shoot. That was his one skill, developed through necessity, refined through thousands of rounds, fired across Iowa farmland, where ammunition was expensive, and every shot had to count. December 1942 brought his draft notice. By March 1943, he was in the Pacific. The problem with American infantry tactics in the jungle wasn't immediately obvious to commanders sitting in air-conditioned headquarters in Brisbane or Noumea. On paper, the M1 Garand semi-automatic rifle gave American troops overwhelming firepower advantage. 8 rounds, faster cycling, reliable operation, superior to the Japanese Arisaka bolt action in every measurable way. Except in the jungle, measurable advantages didn't matter. The Japanese didn't fight in open fields. They fought from spider holes, from trees, from positions so well camouflaged that American troops walked past them without seeing. They fought at dawn and dusk when light was uncertain. They sent scouts ahead, small teams of 2 or 3 men who would probe American lines, identify weak points, then melt back into the jungle before anyone could respond. These scouts were killing American soldiers with methodical efficiency. On Guadalcanal, Private Eddie Larson from Minnesota was shot through the throat by a scout he never saw. The Japanese sniper had been 40 yards away, hidden in a palm tree for 6 hours. Larson bled out in 90 seconds while his squad mates returned fire at empty jungle. On New Georgia, Corporal James Rutherford from Georgia was killed by a scout firing from a camouflaged pit. Rutherford had walked within 10 feet of the position. The scout waited until he passed, then shot him in the back. By the time Rutherford's unit located the pit, it was empty. On Rendova, Sergeant Frank Hoskins from Michigan lost 3 men in one morning to a single Japanese scout who picked them off from a ridge 200 yards distant. The scout fired, moved, fired again. When American troops finally overran the position 2 hours later, they found spent cartridges and footprints. No body. The pattern repeated across the Solomon Islands. Japanese scouts operated with near impunity because American infantry couldn't respond effectively. The M1 Garand, designed for rapid fire at close range, wasn't built for precision shooting at distance. The standard infantry doctrine emphasized volume of fire over accuracy. Spray and pray. Suppressive fire. Close with the enemy. But you can't close with an enemy you can't see. Vandermeer arrived on Bougainville in October 1943 and watched the pattern continue. His unit, Company K, 3rd Battalion, 148th Infantry Regiment, lost 2 men in the first week to scout activity. Both shot from positions over 150 yards away. Both dead before anyone could identify the shooter's location. The first was Private Tommy Whitaker, from Tennessee, 20 years old, engaged to a girl named Sarah back home. He was carrying ammunition forward when a bullet took him through the chest. He died asking for his mother. The second was Corporal Vincent Calabrese from New York, a former longshoreman who'd worked the Brooklyn docks before the war. He was shaving when the bullet hit, straight through the temple. His razor was still in his hand when they found him. Vandermeer knew both men. Not well, he'd only been with the unit 3 weeks, but well enough. Whitaker had loaned him a poncho during a rainstorm. Calabrese had shown him how to dig a proper drainage ditch around his foxhole. Now they were dead because the Japanese owned the long-range fight. The official response was inadequate. Officers distributed Springfield M1903 rifles to designated marksmen, 1 per platoon. The Springfield was bolt action, more accurate than the Garand, fitted with iron sights, capable of 300-yard shots. In theory, this solved the problem. In practice, it didn't. The Springfield standard issue sights were designed for general infantry use, not precision work. At 200 yards in jungle conditions, limited visibility, uncertain light, camouflaged targets, they were marginal at best. Vandermeer received one of the Springfields and immediately recognized its limitations. The sight picture was too coarse. The stock design promoted instability. Firing from a standing or kneeling position introduced too much wobble. He tried prone shooting, but jungle terrain made that difficult. Mud, roots, uneven ground. There was rarely a clean firing position. Even when he found one, the standard Springfield configuration didn't provide enough stability for the precision shooting the situation demanded. Men kept dying. On October 28th, Private Leo Fisher from Wisconsin was killed by a scout firing from a tree line 175 yards distant. Fisher had been eating breakfast. The bullet entered below his left ear and exited through his right eye. He was dead before his mess kit hit the ground. Vandermeer was 20 feet away when it happened. He watched medics cover Fisher's body with a poncho. He watched them carry him to the collection point, where dead men waited for graves registration. He watched Fisher's personal effects, wallet, letters, photographs, get placed in a small canvas bag. That night, alone in his foxhole, Vandermeer thought about his grandfather's hay rack rifle. The modification wasn't complicated. Vandermeer had watched his grandfather build 3 different versions over the years. The principle was simple. Extend the forward support structure to create a stable firing platform that could rest on any available surface, log, rock, sandbag, whatever was available. The challenge was doing it with materials available in a combat zone. Vandermeer started with scrap lumber from an ammunition crate. Rough pine, splintery, but workable. He needed a piece approximately 18 inches long, 4 inches wide. He found a suitable plank in the supply dump after evening chow on October 29th. Nobody questioned why he wanted it. Plenty of soldiers scrounged wood for various purposes, reinforcing foxholes, building seats, constructing makeshift tables. He worked after dark, sitting in his foxhole with a small flashlight, using his trench knife to shape the wood. The goal was to create a platform that would extend forward from the rifle's fore-end, supported by 2 vertical struts attached to the barrel band and front sight assembly. The vertical struts were the hard part. He needed something rigid enough to support the platform, but light enough not to destroy the rifle's balance. He found his answer in the motor pool. 2 sections of aluminum tubing from a damaged aircraft part, each about 6 inches long, 3/4 of an inch in diameter. He liberated them around 11 p.m., walking casually past the motor sergeant, who was too busy inventorying truck parts to notice. The smell of the jungle at night was thick. Rotting vegetation, standing water, the faint petroleum odor from fuel dumps. Mosquitoes whined around his head. His hands were already covered in small cuts from the rough wood. He worked by feel as much as sight, the flashlight tucked between his shoulder and cheek. Attaching the struts required drilling. He didn't have a drill. He used a heated nail instead, warming it over a small can of sterno cooking fuel, then pushing it through the wood to create mounting holes. The process took 40 minutes and left his hands blackened with soot and blistered from repeatedly gripping the hot nail with pliers. At 1:15 a.m. on October 30th, he had the basic structure complete, a wooden platform extending 18 inches forward from the Springfield's fore-end, supported by 2 aluminum struts attached to the barrel band with wire scavenged from communication cable. It looked ridiculous, ungainly, like something a farmer would build in a barn. But when he rested it across a sandbag and looked through the sights, the stability was remarkable. The crosshairs barely moved. The wobble that plagued standing and kneeling shots simply disappeared. He tested it the next morning during a quiet period, firing 3 rounds at a tree stump 225 yards distant. All 3 shots clustered within a 6-inch circle. With standard configuration, he would have been lucky to hit the stump at all. The modification worked. It was also completely illegal. Army regulations explicitly prohibited modification of issued weapons. The official manual stated, "Rifles will be maintained in standard configuration without alteration of barrel, stock, or sighting mechanisms." Vandermeer's hay rack platform violated that regulation comprehensively. If discovered during inspection, it would mean court-martial, destruction of government property, possibly dishonorable discharge. He didn't care. On November 1st, Corporal Danny Fletcher from Ohio was killed by a Japanese scout operating from a ridge 190 yards from the American perimeter. Fletcher had been Vandermeer's tent mate, a former auto mechanic from Akron who'd spent the previous evening showing Vandermeer photographs of his 2 daughters. The scout fired once and disappeared. Fletcher died slowly over 12 minutes, gut shot, calling for his wife. Vandermeer decided that regulations could go to hell. The morning of November 3rd began with fog, thick, wet, clinging to the kunai grass, and low jungle scrub like something physical. Visibility was maybe 60 yards. The Japanese used fog like this, used it to move close, to probe defenses, to gather intelligence. Vandermeer was on perimeter watch, positioned in a foxhole on the northeastern edge of Company K's defensive line. His hay rack, Springfield, rested across a sandbag, covered with a poncho to keep the moisture off the action. He'd said nothing to anyone about the modification. As far as his squad mates knew, it was just a standard issue rifle. The fog started lifting around 4:30 a.m., slowly, like a curtain being drawn back. At 4:47 a.m., Vandermeer saw movement. Not much, just a disturbance in the kunai grass, 180 yards distant. Could have been wind. Could have been an animal. Probably wasn't. He watched through his sights, barely breathing. 30 seconds later, he saw them. Japanese scouts, moving in a loose formation, low and careful, using the terrain. He counted 9 men. They were advancing toward the American line, trying to identify defensive positions before full daylight. Standard Japanese doctrine: get close, observe, withdraw, report back, then return in force. Vandermeer had maybe 10 minutes before they reached a point where they could see Company K's entire defensive layout. He didn't call for the sergeant, didn't alert anyone. The scouts were still 175 yards out, too far for reliable M1 Garand fire, too far for anyone else to engage effectively, but not too far for him. He settled the hay rack platform across the sandbag. The weight distributed perfectly. No wobble. He worked the bolt, chambering around, feeling the mechanical click as the action locked. The nearest scout was slightly ahead of the others, moving carefully through a gap in the kunai grass. Vandermeer put the front sight blade on the scout's chest, exhaled slowly, squeezed. The Springfield cracked. The scout dropped. The other 8 froze. For maybe 2 seconds, they didn't move. Didn't understand what had happened. The range was too far. Americans didn't shoot accurately at this distance. Vandermeer worked the bolt, chambered another round, found the second scout, fired, another drop, clean hit, center mass. Now the remaining 7 understood. They scattered, dropped flat into the grass, started crawling backward toward the tree line, but Vandermeer could still see them. The hay rack platform gave him stability they hadn't anticipated. He tracked a 3rd scout, moving fast through the kunai, and fired. Hit him in the shoulder. The scout kept moving, but slowed. Vandermeer worked the bolt, fired again. The scout stopped moving. 3 down, 6 remaining. The fog was continuing to lift, visibility improving. The scouts were trying to withdraw, but they had 180 yards of open ground to cover, and Vandermeer had a clear field of fire. A 4th scout made a run for it, broke from cover, and sprinted toward the tree line. Bad decision. Vandermeer led him by 2 feet, accounting for movement, and fired. The scout stumbled and went down hard. 4 down, 5 remaining. Now they were desperate. 2 scouts opened fire on Vandermeer's position, trying to suppress him while the others withdrew. Their Arisaka rounds cracked past his foxhole, impacting the sandbags. He ducked, waited 3 seconds, then came back up. 5th scout, moving right to left at 160 yards. Vandermeer tracked him, led him slightly, fired, hit him in the leg. The scout went down but started crawling. Vandermeer chambered another round, aimed more carefully, fired again. The scout stopped crawling. 5 down, 4 remaining. The remaining scouts were falling back fast now, abandoning stealth for speed. Vandermeer fired at a 6th scout and missed, rushed the shot, pulled it left. He worked the bolt, adjusted, fired again. Hit him in the back. The scout collapsed. 6 down, 3 remaining. The last 3 reached the tree line. Vandermeer fired twice more, but they were moving through heavy vegetation, and he couldn't confirm hits. He watched the jungle for another 5 minutes, but they were gone. The entire engagement had lasted 8 minutes. Vandermeer's hands were shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline dump. He'd just killed 6 men, possibly 7, in less time than it took to eat breakfast. He sat back in his foxhole, breathing hard, the Springfield still resting on the hay rack platform. Behind him, he heard voices. His squad mates were coming out of their positions, alerted by the shooting. Sergeant Miller arrived first, a stocky man from Pennsylvania who'd been in the Army since 1940. "What the hell happened?" Miller demanded. "Japanese scouts," Vandermeer said. His voice sounded strange in his own ears. 9 of them. Got 6 confirmed, maybe 7. Miller stared at him. "At what range?" "Started at 180 yards. Last ones were maybe 160. "Bullshit," Miller said flatly. "Nobody hits at that range with a Springfield." Vandermeer said nothing, just pointed at the kunai grass where bodies were visible in the improving light. Miller looked, counted. His expression changed. "Jesus Christ," he said quietly. By 6:30 a.m., word had spread through Company K. The farm boy from Iowa had dropped 6, possibly 7, Japanese scouts in 8 minutes at ranges nobody thought possible with standard infantry weapons. Men came to look at Vandermeer's foxhole, at the bodies in the grass, at the rifle. That's when they noticed the hay rack platform. Corporal Bill Henderson from Kansas was the first to ask about it. "What the hell is that?" He pointed at the wooden platform extending from the Springfield's forend. Vandermeer explained, simply, without embellishment. It was a stability platform. His grandfather had used something similar for groundhogs. It eliminated wobble, made long-range shooting possible. Henderson stared at it. "That's not standard issue." "No," Vandermeer agreed. "It's not. Regulations say you can't modify weapons." "I know." Henderson looked at the bodies in the grass, looked back at the rifle. "Fuck regulations," he said finally. "Can you make me one?" Private First Class Mike Sullivan from Boston overheard. "Make me one too." By noon, Vandermeer had 7 requests. By evening, he had 15. The problem was materials. Vandermeer had scrounged his platform from whatever he could find, but building 15 more required resources he didn't have. Henderson solved that problem. He was the company scrounger, the guy who could acquire anything for the right trade. Within 2 days, he'd collected enough scrap lumber, aluminum tubing, and wire to build 20 platforms. Vandermeer worked at night in the supply tent, building hay rack platforms by flashlight and kerosene lamp. The process was crude but functional. Each platform took about 90 minutes to construct, cutting the wood, heating the nail to drill mounting holes, bending and attaching the aluminum struts, securing everything with wire and friction. He didn't ask permission, didn't submit paperwork, just built them and handed them out to anyone who asked. Within a week, 23 men in Company K were using modified Springfields. The effect was immediate and dramatic. On November 9th, 2 Japanese scouts approached the perimeter at dawn. Private Sullivan, using a hay rack Springfield, killed both at 195 yards before they reached observation range. On November 12th, a 3-man scout team tried to probe the southern defensive line. Corporal Henderson dropped all 3 in less than 3 minutes. Range, 210 yards. On November 15th, Japanese scouts stopped approaching Company K's sector entirely. They shifted their reconnaissance efforts to other units without the modified rifles. Word spread beyond Company K. By late November, men from other companies were asking about the hay rack platforms. How did they work? Could Vandermeer build more? He could. He did. By December, an estimated 60 modified Springfields were in use across the 148th Infantry Regiment. The modification spread through informal networks, soldiers talking to soldiers, platoon sergeants passing information to other platoon sergeants. No official documentation, no engineering approval, just whispered conversations and late-night construction sessions. The Japanese noticed. Japanese intelligence reports from late November 1943, later captured and translated, make reference to American tactical changes on Bougainville. One report, dated November 28th, notes, enemy marksmen demonstrate unexpected capability at extended range. Scout casualties increasing. Recommend increased caution in approach operations. A captured diary from a Japanese sergeant includes this entry from December 3rd. Americans shooting differently now. We cannot get close. 3 scouts lost yesterday at ranges we thought safe. Something has changed. The most telling evidence comes from interrogation reports. A Japanese corporal, captured on December 18th, told his interrogators that forward observers had been ordered to maintain minimum 250-yard distance from American positions, up from the previous 150-yard standard. When asked why, he said, because they can kill us further than before. The modification was working, not just tactically, but psychologically. The Japanese had owned the long-range fight for months. Now they didn't, but success brought scrutiny. On December 21, 1943, Captain Robert Thornton conducted a surprise inspection of Company K's weapons. Thornton was a West Point graduate, fastidious about regulations, the kind of officer who believed military discipline began with equipment conformity. He found 23 modified Springfields in the first hour. "What?" Thornton said, standing in the company area holding one of the hay rack rifles. "Is this?" Sergeant Miller attempted to explain. The modification improved accuracy. It was saving lives. Scout casualties had dropped dramatically since implementation. Thornton cut him off. "This is unauthorized modification of government property, direct violation of Army regulations." He turned to Miller. "Who's responsible?" Miller hesitated, then, "I don't know, sir. The men just started showing up with them." Thornton didn't believe him. "Somebody built these. I want a name." Nobody spoke. Thornton's face reddened. "Fine. All modified weapons will be confiscated immediately. Destroyed. Anyone found with a modified rifle after 1,800 hours today will face court-martial." He meant it. By evening, 23 hay rack platforms had been removed from Springfields and burned. Vandermeer watched them go into the fire pit, wood and aluminum melting into ash, and felt something cold settle in his chest. 2 days later, Japanese scouts killed Private First Class George Martinez from Texas, shot from 185 yards while he was filling canteens at the water point. He died before the medics arrived. Martinez had been using a hay rack rifle. Thornton's order had taken it away. Vandermeer built another platform that night, didn't hide it, didn't pretend it was authorized. He simply constructed it, attached it to his Springfield, and went back on perimeter watch. 3 other soldiers did the same. Sergeant Miller found out the next morning. He pulled Vandermeer aside. "Captain finds out. You're done. Court-martial. Dishonorable discharge. Probably Leavenworth." "I know," Vandermeer said. "Then why?" "Because it works," Vandermeer said simply. "Because Martinez is dead, and he wouldn't be if he still had his platform, because more men are going to die if we follow regulations. Miller looked at him for a long moment. Finally, keep it hidden during inspections. I'll do what I can. The underground reconstruction continued. Men built new platforms secretly, kept them concealed during official inspections, used them only during actual operations. By mid-January 1944, approximately 40 modified rifles were back in use across the regiment. Captain Thornton never found out, or if he did, he chose not to act. But someone higher up the chain noticed. Statistics told the story Thornton couldn't see. In October 1943, before the hay rack modification appeared, Company K suffered an average of 4.2 casualties per week from Japanese scout activity. That figure included killed and wounded, men hit by long-range fire they couldn't effectively return. In November, after widespread adoption of the modification, casualties dropped to 1.8 per week. In December, despite Thornton's confiscation order and subsequent underground reconstruction, casualties remained at 2.1 per week. Across the entire 148th Infantry Regiment, the pattern was similar. Before the modification, 17.6 weekly casualties from scout activity. After, 6.3 weekly casualties. 64% reduction. Conservative estimates, based on casualty rates and the duration of the Bougainville campaign, credit the hay rack modification with preventing approximately 130 casualties between November 1943 and March 1944. Roughly 40 of those would have been fatal. Someone at division headquarters noticed the statistical anomaly. On February 8, 1944, a team of 3 officers arrived at Company K's position to investigate. They weren't there to punish anyone. They were there to understand why one regiment's scout-related casualties were dramatically lower than everyone else's. Sergeant Miller showed them, handed them a hay rack Springfield, explained the modification, demonstrated the stability improvement. The lead investigator, a major named Wilson, examined the platform carefully. "This isn't in the manual," he said. "No, sir," Miller agreed. "Who designed it?" Miller pointed at Vandermeer, who was cleaning his rifle 30 feet away. Wilson walked over. "Private, did you create this modification?" "Yes, sir," Vandermeer said. "Where'd you get the idea?" "My grandfather, sir. He used something similar for groundhog hunting." Wilson smiled slightly. "Groundhogs?" "Yes, sir." Wilson turned the rifle over in his hands, examining the platform from multiple angles. "It's crude," he said finally, "but it's effective." He looked at Vandermeer. "How many of these have you built?" "Originally 23, sir. Captain Thornton ordered them destroyed. Men have been rebuilding them since." "Captain Thornton ordered them destroyed?" "Yes, sir. Unauthorized modification of government property." Wilson's expression hardened. "Captain Thornton is technically correct, but he's also an idiot." He handed the rifle back to Vandermeer. "Keep building these. I'll handle Thornton." What happened next took 3 months and involved more paperwork than Vandermeer thought possible. Major Wilson filed a report recommending official evaluation of the hay rack modification. That report sat on a desk at Division HQ for 6 weeks before anyone read it. When someone finally did, it was forwarded to the Army Ground Forces Equipment Board, which specialized in evaluating field modifications and tactical innovations. The Equipment Board sent a team to Bougainville in April 1944. They tested the modification extensively, compared accuracy between standard Springfield configuration and hay rack configuration at ranges from 100 to 400 yards, interviewed soldiers using the modification, examined casualty statistics. Their conclusion, filed in May 1944. The hay rack stability platform demonstrates significant improvement in practical accuracy at ranges exceeding 150 yards. Recommend authorization for field manufacture and implementation across sniper-designated riflemen in Pacific Theater. The report included one additional recommendation: explore development of factory-manufactured version, incorporating design improvements for durability and consistency. In June 1944, official authorization was granted for hay rack platforms. Supply sergeants across the Pacific Theater received instructions on construction specifications. Designated marksmen were encouraged to adopt the modification. The authorization came with no mention of Vandermeer. No credit, no recognition. The official documentation attributed the innovation to field development by combat units in response to tactical requirements. Vandermeer didn't care. He'd built the platforms to save lives, not to get medals. By August 1944, an estimated 800 hay rack Springfields were in use across the Pacific. By war's end, that number exceeded 2,000. The modification became standard enough that Japanese intelligence reports from 1945 routinely reference American platform rifles as a distinct tactical threat. After the war ended, Vandermeer returned to Iowa. He took over his family's farm in the spring of 1946, married a woman named Eleanor he'd known since high school, and spent the next 43 years growing corn and soybeans on the same 240 acres his grandfather had homesteaded. He never talked much about the war. When asked, he would say he'd been infantry, that he'd served in the Pacific, and then change the subject. The hay rack rifle hung above his workshop bench, the original one he'd built in October 1943, smuggled home in his duffel bag. He used it occasionally for groundhogs. It still worked. In 1987, a military historian researching Pacific Theater tactical innovations tracked Vandermeer down through veteran records. The historian wanted to interview him about the hay rack modification, about how it had developed, about its impact. Vandermeer agreed reluctantly. The interview was brief. The historian asked about the modification's origin. Vandermeer explained about his grandfather, about the groundhogs, about watching men die because they couldn't shoot back effectively. "Did you know," the historian asked, "that your modification is credited with saving approximately 200 lives?" Vandermeer shook his head. "I just built what made sense." "You were never officially recognized for it." "Didn't need to be." "Doesn't that bother you?" Vandermeer considered the question. "No," he said finally. "I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because Fletcher and Martinez and Whitaker deserved better than dying to scouts they couldn't see." The historian's research eventually became a chapter in a book about field innovations in World War II. The book mentioned Vandermeer by name, credited him with developing the hay rack platform, and estimated its life-saving impact. Vandermeer never read it. Eleanor bought a copy, but he left it on the shelf. Raymond Vandermeer died on March 14, 1989, at age 66, from complications of emphysema. His obituary in the Sioux City Journal mentioned that he'd served in the Army during World War II, that he'd farmed for 43 years, and that he was survived by his wife, 3 children, and 7 grandchildren. It made no mention of the hay rack rifle, made no mention of Japanese scouts, or casualty statistics, or tactical innovations. His grandson inherited the original hay rack Springfield. It hangs in a gun safe in Des Moines, a crude wooden platform attached to a 1943 Springfield M1903, built by a farm boy who solved problems the way farmers do, with whatever materials were available and zero concern for official approval. The broader lesson here isn't about rifles or modifications or even tactical innovation. It's about initiative. War doesn't wait for authorization, doesn't wait for engineering studies or committee approvals or official doctrine revisions. Men die while paperwork circulates. The hay rack platform worked because someone recognized a problem, had the skill to solve it, and the courage to act, despite institutional resistance. Not through generals or colonels or West Point graduates. Through a private first class from Iowa who'd spent his childhood shooting groundhogs and couldn't stomach watching more men die for lack of a solution. That's how real innovation happens in war. Not through official channels. Through soldiers who see what needs fixing and fix it. Through sergeants who look the other way. Through majors who recognize effectiveness when they see it and are willing to fight their own bureaucracy. The hay rack platform eventually became official doctrine, got integrated into sniper training programs, influenced post-war rifle design, saved hundreds of lives. But it started as an illegal modification built at night by a farm boy with a trench knife and scrap lumber, who decided that regulations mattered less than keeping his friends alive. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person, one idea, one decision to act. The rest is just paperwork. If you found this story compelling, please like this video. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Thank you for keeping these stories alive.